I'll start a brief introduction. It's a little after 5:30 and we have a little over 50 people, but hi everyone. I am Chris Dennis from Charlotte East. I'm a board member with Charlotte East and I serve as the co-chair on the Transportation Committee with Maureen Galuski, who's also a Charlotte East board member, treasurer, and Eastside advocate. So welcome everyone for coming. Just to let you know that I'm going to give a brief introduction tonight and a little bit of the housekeeping rules for our meeting. Over 100 people signed up for this meeting tonight, and we are most pleased for those that were able to attend, those that were interested in attending, and those that will see this posted on the Charlotte East website, because it's being recorded, this event, and we'll be able to see it and join and listen again or listen for the first time on our website afterwards. So there's a, we're going to use the chat for our questions this evening. It's very, I think we're all Zoom experts right now, whether we want it to be or not. And it's very hard with this many people to sort of get in question and answer mode without navigating a chat or some formal way. If we have and we get through the chat, we'll certainly open it up for questions and navigate that. But if you can stay muted and use the chat, and feel free to add comments to the chat, questions to the chat, as well as specific questions for the panel or anything about their presentation that you would like to know more about. If we are unable to get through the chat tonight and your question wasn't answered, please know that we're going to record it and we're going to share it with all of our city co-hosts and get the questions answered for you. So don't feel slighted if you didn't get your question answered, or if you'd like to respond to it. This is certainly a beginning of a longer dialogue and conversation we'll have about East Charlotte transportation and the future of Eastside transit, biking, walking, and trail connections. And I'd really like to start off with welcoming our panel, Taiwo Jaiyeoba. He's the Charlotte Assistant Manager and Director of Planning, Design, and Development. Thank you, Taiwo. Liz Babson, she's the Director of Charlotte's Department of Transportation. We have John Lewis, the CEO of Charlotte Area Transit System, or CATS. We have Ed McKinney, who's the Deputy Director of Charlotte Department of Transportation and a facilitator for this evening. And I think I also saw Scott Carey in the audience as well. Our special guests tonight are Julie Eiselt, City Council Mayor Pro Tem, thank you. Larken Egleston from City Council District 1, local. Thanks, Larken, hi. And we also have Matt Newton from City Council District 5, hi Matt. And Mark Jarrell, County Commissioner District 4, hey Mark. Lee Altman, our County Commissioner. We Sawyer from the Mecklenburg School Board of Education, District 4. We have Bert Lynn from the Capital Planning Division, Director of Mecklenburg County Park and Rec. Katie Lloyd, Senior Planner, County Park and Rec. Bart Landis, Executive Director of the Catawba Lands Conservancy. Patsy Kinsey, former Charlotte Mayor and City Council District 1 representative, and our Charlotte East board member and vice chair. And Louise Woods, former CMS Board of Education, District 4, Charlotte East board member and Education Committee member. So the future of Eastside transit, biking, walking, and trail connections. And based upon our invited guest and the nature of the context, this is really about multimodal connectivity on the East Side, which connects us to so many things. It's all about jobs, it's about work, it's about play, and it's about our quality of life. So this evening, stay muted, use the chat. Our panelists are going to give a presentation and McKinney's going to facilitate that. Then we're going to come back to Danny Kearns and Areli. They're both Charlotte East Transportation Committee members, and they're going to navigate the chat Q&A for us. We'll go through those questions and the panel will answer them, and we'll see where we are with our time at that point. So Taiwo, if you're ready, take it away.
I think this is Ed McKinney. I apologize. And Ty is texting me. I think we have our first technical glitch of the night. He's having a little hard time logging in. So if you bear with me for just a minute, see if we can't send him a new link. Hold on for just 1 minute. Let me try that.
Everybody can take these few moments to put their thoughts in the chat.
Sorry about that. Let me, I just sent him an email, see if he gets
Yeah,
the right link.
I'm here now using my iPad. Sorry about that.
So Ty, I'll catch you back up. We've already introduced the panel and the group, and this is now a great opportunity just to give you a quick sense, maybe everyone of the agenda. We really want to start off and have Taiwo just sort of set the stage and talk about some of the big things that are going on that'll kind of frame the conversation this evening. So with that, I'll hand it over to Taiwo.
Thank you very much, Ed. Once again, I'm sorry for some reason the passcode wasn't taking the passcode, but anyway, we're here now. So good evening. It's good to see everyone tonight. There's a lot going on in our city right now, especially with some major initiatives that we're working on. The first one, obviously, that I will talk about is Charlotte Future Comprehensive Plan, which is really a big picture for how we envision our city to be able to address growth and development going into the next several years. But I will go to the next slide quickly about what exactly this comprehensive plan does. And I've explained a little bit to a few of you in the past, but for those who are just hearing from me for the first time, the important thing to keep in mind is that this plan is a primarily land use document, but it touches a lot of other things, whether it's the way we plan our parks and open space areas, or the way we address environmental sustainability, or location of fire facilities or police services, or jobs creation, affordable housing situation, or even mobility plans. So it's really guiding our growth over the next 20 years in terms of how we address all of these things, including even upward mobility, health, and safety of our residents. Next slide. So over the last 2.5 years, as we have been engaging folks in our city, we identified, at least with them, about 10 different goals that everything we've heard really boiled down into. So we've had many comments prior to the release of the draft plan back in October of last year. And all of those comments, as we pulled them together, there were 10 goals that seemed to be the central focus of participants. One is definitely creating 10-minute neighborhoods. And you see all of these, but I will just really focus on the safe and equitable mobility goal, because that's really what we're here tonight to talk about. When we talk about safe and equitable mobility, and we're going to talk more about this later this evening, but it's really about the fact that when you think about our city right now, pre-COVID, about 76.6% of Charlotteans were driving to work on their own every day. 51% of people commute from outside Mecklenburg County into our city pre-COVID. I believe that number will go up once we open, because a number of people have moved here since COVID-19, but because people may still be a little bit reluctant to use transit when we reopen, most people will still end up driving. So that number could slightly see an increase. But how can we make a shift in creating balanced mobility so that the investment is not just on roadways and vehicles, but it also includes mobility as regarding greenways and trails and bikeways and public transit and pedestrian activities, creating mobility hubs. So it's really making sure that we prioritize investment in different modes so that we can swing that mode shift from 76.6% to something that's less than that. And it takes a lot of investment, obviously, but first and foremost is that we got to set the policies in place that will allow us to do that. So people have a choice. If people choose to drive, they can drive. If they want to jump on a transit line, they can. If they want to ride their bicycle, they can. But if they choose to use the trails, or even people on wheelchairs who depend on sidewalks to be able to get from one place to another, it should be sufficient enough and complete enough to be able to get them there. So this is really what safe and equitable mobility means. It means something that's invested in a multimodal fashion and that's integrated so that people don't have to connect 3 or 4 different means of mobility to get to where they need to get to. Next slide. So over the last, few years, actually predating my time with the city, we started developing the rules for growth. So if we're saying that about almost 400,000 people will move to Charlotte, or our population will increase by almost 400,000 people, in another 20 years, that takes our population to about 1.2 million people just within the city alone. So prior to my time, we've been setting up what those rules, regulations guiding growth and what they should look like. But then about 3 years ago, we decided that before we set the regulations in place, why don't we have a vision discussion with our community? Let's talk about what that future really looks like. How do we accommodate 380,000 people? Where will they live? How will they, how will they move from one place to another? Hence the reason why we've been working on those two initiatives simultaneously. It's really about let's set our vision for growth while we're also making sure that we calibrate the rules that will implement those vision for growth. But it doesn't matter how good that work is if people really can't connect from one place to another, because these people moving here, they are not necessarily going to bring their asphalt with them, but they will still need to be able to move around one way or the other. And we wanted to be able to discourage reliance on the automobile while there will be other means for people to be able to connect from one place to the other. But we're not the only ones doing this. I'll say that every city, every town in our county today has a plan. I believe Pineville just adopted their mobility plan back in December of last year. Huntersville adopted their comprehensive plan December of 2020. We have the MEC playbook that's going to be adopted, that's been done by the county, that will be adopted in 2 months' time with regards to Park and Rec. We also have our Envision My Ride, which we did ourselves, and John Lewis will be speaking more to that. We have this Council of Government working on Connect Beyond, which is really about 12 different counties in 2 states. How do we communicate and connect between all of these different agencies, but also different people who live in all of these jurisdictions? So our focus has been working on all these initiatives simultaneously within the city, but also communicating with our colleagues who are working on all of these other initiatives to make sure that we're working in lockstep with them. Next slide. So at this point, I will turn it over to Ed. And like I said at the beginning, all of those things that I just talked about, we're going to kind of talk about them as it relates to Charlotte East, but also what we're doing regarding all of these initiatives that are going on citywide. So Ed.
Thanks, Ty. So with that introduction, that context, what we would like to try to do tonight is kind of an interesting new format, a little sort of panel discussion amongst our key presenters here tonight. So again, we've got Taiwo, we've got Liz Babson as the Director of Charlotte Transportation, and John Lewis, the CEO of CATS. Again, I'm Ed McKinney. I'm a Deputy Director in the Transportation Department, and I guess in some ways I work for all 3 of them, and I get the tough task of kind of keeping them on point tonight and moving the conversation along. So I'm going to do my best job to keep the conversation rolling. We're going to spend maybe about the next 30 or 40 minutes in a conversation around some themes. And these themes, I really want to appreciate and thank the Charlotte East Transportation Committee, because these themes are really based on some very specific information they gave us to help us think through how to focus the conversation tonight. So there's some very specific questions and topics they gave us. We kind of organize them in these themes. So what we'd like to do is walk through each one, share a little bit with what the Transportation Committee shared with us in terms of what does this mean for East Charlotte, give you a little bit of background, just enough to spark some conversation amongst Ty and Liz and John, and just hopefully sort of walk through kind of sort of an interesting way to think about mobility and transportation in East Charlotte amongst these really key topics for East Charlotte. So I'll start with the first one. And again, just a reminder, I think we mentioned it before, but as you're doing this, you've got questions, put them in the chat. When we're done, we'll have plenty of time to just have an open conversation and some facilitated Q&A on your broader questions as we continue through the conversation. So the first one, probably can't start any conversation about transportation in Charlotte or development in Charlotte without talking about growth and the fast pace of growth. We know we're obviously growing, one of the fastest growing cities in the country, putting unique pressure on this, and certainly some very unique challenges in East Charlotte. What's up on this map real quick is a number of recent rezonings that the Transportation Committee reminded us of. We wanted to put them on a map. These are mostly in the sort of the far east part of East Charlotte. On the bottom of that map is Albemarle Road, and on the right side is 485. The message here, and we'll talk about this, is just we understand that there's a tremendous amount of new growth that's happening, particularly in a place like East Charlotte that still needs infrastructure, particularly around mobility. It's still a suburban rural context. And the challenge is, what does that mean for how we're both thinking about our regulations and our transportation infrastructure? A few seeds on this about a couple of projects that Liz will refer to in a minute, but maybe the way to pose this back to the panel is start with Ty to talk a little bit about the bigger picture of the Unified Development Ordinance. What does it mean for our growth? How will it affect some of these specific cases, and both in the short and long term, and how are we thinking about the transportation gaps and the infrastructure gaps that we're trying to fill with these new regulations?
Thank you very much, Ed. I'll start off, and then Liz can jump in. So you may know, obviously, as I said earlier, that we're working on a Unified Development Ordinance, but I would start by explaining what that is. So right now we've got all the different regulations and ordinances guiding land development. We've got all of them in about 8 different places. This includes ordinances related to sidewalks or stormwater, trees. They all exist right now in different documents. The problem with that is they were developed at different points in time by different people. And so because they're outdated, and also because they were developed by people with different things in mind, we just pretty much focused on different areas, whether it's the zoning ordinance or the subdivision ordinance, the likelihood is that they conflict, and the interpretations are never always, very easy. So the idea behind this that we started several years ago was to consolidate all of these ordinances into one. Hence the reason we call it Unified Development Ordinance. It's really pulling all of this together, not just binding them together, but eliminating redundancies, removing areas that are not predictable or that are less transparent, and to make sure that we pull them together in such a way that it does not take a developer to understand what that UDO is saying, but even neighbors and residents who live in areas that could be impacted by development can look at that UDO and pretty much see the graphic that will be visually displayed there to say, okay, this is the scale, this is the height, this is the width of this building, this is what it might do to my community, and be able to really respond to that. So right now we don't have it. We rely on our community area plans. We rely on a zoning ordinance that was written in 1992, but which we amend every now and then. It's about 1,000 pages in size, and that doesn't even talk about the other regulations. Right now, that's how we do our rezonings. We go through the zoning ordinance. We try to look at statement of whether they're consistent with a comprehensive plan or they measure up to the requirements of the zoning ordinance. And in certain instances, they could be either you have it what we call a conventional zoning, which does not necessarily require community meeting, but the developer can actually do it because the land use allows them to do it. So an area is zoned for, multifamily development. If that's what the land use actually designates it as, the developer can actually go there and develop it for that particular use without having to have community input. That's a conventional rezoning. It does not require a site plan because the land use plan already has that in place. Now, if we have a UDO, conventional zonings will continue to be subject to the new regulations of the UDO, because there will be some new regulations in the UDO for that particular zoning district, however, that they're subject to. And so long as some permits have not been pulled, even for the ones that have been approved, if they don't submit permits prior to the adoption of the UDO, they will now have to be subjected to the requirements of a UDO. And then conditional zonings or conditional rezonings are exactly what it says. It means there are conditions related to that particular zoning request. So if the particular land use is not what the developer wants to build, then they request a rezoning to change it from that particular land use to another one, or maybe the same land use but a different degree of intensity. When we have a UDO in place, it usually will come with a site plan different from a conventional zoning. it will be treated as a bit of a hybrid when we have the UDO in place. In other words, they will have to, comply with the conditions on their site plan, because they have a site plan in place. If it's already adopted, if it's already approved by council, they will have to comply with those conditions on the site plan, regardless of what happens. But then we will still have to, if they have not built anything, the UDO upon adoption will still have to play a role in that. I know that says a lot, but what it means though is this: when we have a UDO in place, it actually, prior to having a UDO in place and we have a plan, it allows the community to be able to influence that rezoning process prior to having a UDO in place. It allows you some degree of predictability, or at least transparency, not negotiations, that says, okay, this is what our community say we want in this place. And so we're going to stick with that, and the UDO will support that. Any future zoning amendment or rezoning is almost like you are revising a comprehensive plan, and usually council may balk at that. So it gives the developer some predictability, but it also gives the residents some transparency. But I believe that the key question though is this: so you've got all these rezoning activities happening. What exactly is the impact on transportation? Not just about driving, but also walking from one place to the other. How do we make sure that we meet those gaps? The fact is that we will continue to require these developers to contribute to transportation infrastructure. Even as they build, as they pull permits, they are still going to be required to do that. So we do have the opportunity today where we have transportation bonds, and Liz will talk more about that. That's the only mechanism we have today from the public perspective. But from the private end, they will still be required to make investment in transportation infrastructure to go along with their approved rezoning. Liz?
Yeah, thank you, Ty. That's a great segue. So again, just to reiterate that point, we build our transportation system through both public and private investment. It's important to remember that. I've heard the theme already about connectivity and quality of life, and those are certainly the themes that we put in the forefront of how we're trying to build out a transportation system. Unfortunately, it doesn't happen all at once, and you see that across the city, not just in Charlotte East, but in many areas, as Ed mentioned earlier, as we are a growing city and moving from very rural to more suburban and even more intensely urban in some of our already urban areas. And so it's just an incremental process. So let's focus some on some of your recent rezoning activity, and you'll see those on the screen. There have been several in the Charlotte East area, for example. And again, development builds some of that transportation infrastructure as they come in and develop those properties consistent with the land use plan or go through that rezoning process. So, as an example, some of the transportation measures and infrastructure that we get through this rezoning process might be things like a development that's large enough could be required to build new streets, or could be required to build street stub connections for future adjacent partial redevelopment so that we can continue to completely build out that transportation system in a more robust way. Sometimes we're able to get reservation for a future greenway connection, which was the case in one of these examples in one of your recent rezonings. And in addition, there's always infrastructure improvements along the road frontage. So we'll get curb and gutter, sidewalk, and streetlights through those projects as well. And so it's really combining those projects that are built through that private development process with the capital investment that we have on the city side. And so again, as another example on this screen, you'll see we've got highlighted here Robinson Church Road, which is a future project for us in our capital program. It's currently moving through advanced planning. We've done some preliminary planning and design work. We now have a cost estimate for that project, and we're looking at working with council to fund that project and its construction in our future bonds. And so again, it's really putting all of those pieces together in an incremental way to build out the transportation system throughout the city. And with that, I will turn it back over to Ed.
Good segue. So again, the emphasis there is this kind of challenge between and this opportunity of using our regulations and coupling that with our capital investment to meet some of these needs and these infrastructure gaps in the UDO is going to be a great opportunity to strengthen that from the development side. Going to the next theme, this is a hot one, I think, recently, and certainly a big emphasis of the work that Ty and the planning department have been doing around the comprehensive plan. And it's really around affordability. And in a couple of images, there were this slide here and the data here to sort of emphasize, I think, what many of us already know. We've got a pretty significant income disparity in our community. It's very geographically focused, and it has some very distinct impacts on the quality of life and the opportunity to connect us and make sure that we're providing accessibility and really using transportation as a way to be part of the strategy we have for economic mobility. And so it was certainly lots of good information that the committee gave us and asked us about, which is, what will these plans and all these strategies that we're talking about, how will they result in making sure that we do in investing in ways that are creating more affordable transportation options, with a specific connection to the important things, jobs, schools, and homes. So we're making sure that we're providing for that economic mobility. And then certainly housing is a part of that. And maybe the way to turn this back to the panel, I'll go back to Ty. Talk a little bit about some of the big ideas of the comprehensive plan, the UDO, around housing, about diversity. What does that mean for the city overall? How might that mean for East Charlotte and really addressing this idea of making sure that we're creating a more affordable community for all?
Thank you very much. So when we started out with the comprehensive plan, one of the things that we knew was a challenge for us as a city was obviously housing affordability. I think at that time we were saying 33,000 units, which was the gap that we had at that time. And of course, we were also chatting with the folks at Harvard who did the upward mobility study, the Harvard Chetty study. We were talking to them as well with regards to the recommendations of the leading on opportunity and how that impacts, our discussions with regards to housing in the comprehensive plan. And one thing that was very clear to us was that we needed to be bold, we needed to be strategic, but we also needed to be intentional and build all of those things around equity. And so when we, after looking at all of the things, the conversations we've had before in the community, remember that I said at the beginning that prior to me starting at the city, we had been talking about the UDO, but we were also talking about place types at that time. And one of the surveys on scientific polling that we did at that time with about 450 people, we asked them, what would be your appetite for a diverse type of housing stock in Charlotte? Duplex, townhomes, triplex, and quadplex. And we found that over 65% of attendees at the Place Type Summit actually expressed interest in diverse forms of housing that would be beyond single family. So once we transitioned into the comprehensive plan, we tested that again with our advisors and ambassadors and found that the answer was still the same on scientific polling, but it was about 66 to 67%. We said, yes, we definitely need middle density housing in our community. So when we eventually developed the comprehensive plan, we built that into this. There are people in our community today. The area median income for our city and our region is 79,100. So there are people today who make 80% of that, and there are people who make 120% of that. Some of them are, fire officers. Some of them are police officers. Some of them are teachers. Even some of them are administrative staff in banks, and they just can't afford to necessarily live in our city simply because there's that missing middle, what we call missing middle, which is it's not necessarily extremely low income, but it's also not luxury. It's really those triplexes, those duplexes, those quadplexes, those accessory dwelling units. Hence the reason why the comprehensive plan pushed that forward, that let's actually rezone the entire city in such a way that it will accommodate all forms of housing products without doing away with single family. People will still be able to build single family detached, but they should also be able to build single family attached, such as townhomes, or build duplexes or triplexes, or in some instances, quadplexes, because we have those places today. It wasn't until 1917, I believe, that the racial zoning law was struck down, and then people started developing HO Homeowners Association, did restrictions to really exclude some people. Hence the reason why housing becomes very difficult to afford, because where you have an inordinate amount of single family housing, and you have an inordinate amount of your land zoned exclusively for single family development, it makes it very difficult, because it limits where you can build this missing middle density housing. It limits that. And when it limits housing supply, then it becomes more expensive. Hence the reason why it's one of the big ideas in the comprehensive plan. But we also know that when you talk about that, one of the first things that really comes into people's mind is density and then traffic. You know, if you put all of these together, what does that do to people moving around and driving, a number of trips? But we truly believe, and I've seen this over and over in studies and in practice, that transit serves communities better when there is compact development. When there is sprawl, it's very difficult to provide transit services to those areas. And when you think about it over and over again, you realize that this density is not necessarily a bad thing. Overcrowding is the issue. And so as we go into the future and we're talking about where you accommodate some of this middle density housing, how would we make sure that there's also transportation options provided for people who live there, and either rely on one or two vehicles? How can they still be able to move around effectively without necessarily stifling the neighborhood or the community? So that's a conversation that we necessarily don't say that today we have a solution for it, because you have a lot of places on the east side that are growing so fast. And some of them already have these types of products. But we need to be mindful as these types of products are built that we have a 5-10 year plan to make sure that we also equally invest in transportation that will help to make it more palatable for people. But the thing to keep in mind before I transition to Liz is that the developers of these products will still be required to contribute to transportation funding. They're not going to be exempt. So just like they are, if they're building 100 units of single family and they're building multiple units of this, they will still be required to provide, to contribute to one way or the other to transportation infrastructure. But this is a big idea. Outside of the balanced mobility, it's something that I believe our city needs. It's something that I believe is urgent. It's something that I believe will help to meet not only some of our housing goals, but will also help us to live in a community that's more diverse and that's more cosmopolitan and that's more attractive to boomers who come here, because we're number one in the country for baby boomers. And we're the top 5 in the country for millennials, and all of them keep coming. And they are not all going to live in single family, detached homes. So we need to make this provision for that type of diversity, while at the same time we're thinking of transportation, schools, and all of that. So Liz, I don't know if you and John want to add to that, but that's a major goal. That's a bold goal. And that's something that I truly believe that we want to stand behind as part of our plan.
Maybe John, this is Ed, maybe John, it may be a good time for you to jump in to talk a little bit about a lot of the work that you've been doing around Envision My Ride and the notion of the transit system, bus system, connecting ourselves between our homes and our work and our places of education.
Great, thank you, Ed. And to the Charlotte East community, I really appreciate the opportunity to address you this evening. I think what you're hearing both from Ty and Liz and Ed and all of this is our opportunity to try and tie all of these plans together into a seamless network that begins with the planning and also on how we move people throughout our community. And from a transit standpoint, we wanted to acknowledge the importance of not only providing as many opportunities for people to utilize transit, but also the need to recognize that our system as it was established was not as effective for many people. We have spent a lot of time, and for good reason, focusing on building out our rail network, but around 65 to 70% of our riders each and every day will get from their origin to their destination on board a bus, not a train. And so we started with our Envision My Ride program, which focused on 3 specific areas. Number one, getting the structure of our system correct. And we launched that in 2018. We moved away from our hub and spoke outdated model to more of a grid system that allowed people to have more direct connects across the county. Second was focusing on frequency. Frequency is a major, major issue. And another study, not the one that Ty's been referred to, but another national study that took a look at access within many of the largest metropolitan areas on the basis of transit, found that here in Charlotte, while you can get almost anywhere in the region utilizing public transit, but the major weakness for us was if that trip required you to take more than one bus to get to from your origin to destination, or transfer from rail to bus, your average trip was 90 minutes. Now think about that, 90 minutes each way. That's 3 to 4 hours of your day just moving from one place to another. That's entirely unacceptable. And our board, the Metropolitan Transit Commission, agreed with that and said we needed to invest in more frequency. More than half of our routes are at the beginning of this study had headways, that's the intervals between buses, of 40 minutes to an hour. So imagine if you miss that bus and have to stand at a bus stop and wait 45 minutes for the next vehicle to come. You've probably got very different thoughts on the effectiveness of our system. And so we began by investing in more frequency. Our goal through the end of this program is to have no bus route that would have intervals of greater than 15 minutes. Now, that's going to require a great deal of investment, but I think we're committed to that outcome. And then lastly is the reliability of our service. What has driven the explosive ridership along the Blue Line was the reliability of that service. And people don't ask for schedules for the Blue Line. They know that generally in the morning a train is going to come every 10 minutes and off-peak is going to come either 15 or 20. And so if we can get to that level of reliability on our bus system, utilizing technological advances like signal preemption in some corridors, that queue jumps that allow buses to get out ahead of the traffic as they're going through a corridor, and in some cases in the right areas, transit only lanes. And so the Envision My Ride was based on those 3 tenets, getting the infrastructure of our bus system right size. Second, investing in frequency for more frequent service. And third, investing in reliability. And when we're at the end of this, when we're able to knit this program together with all of the things that Taiwo has talked about in terms of zoning and planning, and the program that Liz and her team are putting together in terms of connectivity, especially with sidewalks, I think we will have gone a long way of creating a community and a mobility system that provides equal access to everyone.
It might be a good segue to go to our next topic, which is around for the Transportation Committee. They posed it to us really in a series of kind of questions around equity. And when we dug deeper into the comments and the notes from the committee, it was really around equity around mode. I think we were hearing from East Charlotte perspective that we need more multimodal connections. We need more transit opportunities. We need more bike facilities, pedestrian facilities, connections to trails. And so as sort of segueing from what John was just talking about, this notion of making sure that we're connecting our land use patterns to the way we move, I think the message we're hearing loud and clear from East Charlotte is you need more ways to move. And so this notion of how do we provide more modal equity, and how will that affect our plans? Maybe I'll going to throw it to Liz and talk a little bit about some of the big ideas that we want to build on from the comprehensive plan into the strategic mobility plan. I'll let her talk a little bit about this technical chart on the slide, but it's all about providing more opportunities and looking for new ways to move us, not just cars. We're really talking about moving people.
Yeah, thanks, Ed. And you know, building on a lot of the conversation you've already heard from this group, I mean, this is sort of the next way of thinking, and it's really bringing together all of these pieces in a much, much more strategic way, recognizing we are a growing city. And with that growth comes lots of great things. But if we don't plan for that growth and build our city in a manner that's sustainable, then it's not going to be a great place to live in some of those areas. And so it's really about how do we create the right land use patterns and developments? How do we provide transit service in areas where there is more intensity, and transit service and support makes a lot of sense, and balance that with lots of travel choices within those areas. And so what you'll see on this graph, if you look at the graph to the right, or the bar chart to the right, to the left, you'll see something that represents where we sit today. And so again, that's no surprise to us. Many of us in this community drive our car, and we don't carpool, and we typically don't take many trips where we walk or bike or take public transit. And so then shift your thinking to the bar chart on the right, and that's really about, as we are becoming a bigger city, and the idea is that we may have a city the size of Raleigh, for example, that moves into the Charlotte geography over the next 20 to 30 years. How do we accommodate for that growth, particularly in our transportation system? And so it's really about providing transit service in a meaningful way where it makes sense, but it's also about creating land use opportunities so that we have a better mixture of uses with those more intense development areas, so people have other transportation choices, so they can walk to the grocery store, they can walk to the other services that they need to access. And again, it's really about shifting the way we grow as a city. And this is important to all of us. So, you know, it's not just, this isn't intended just to support people that want to ride transit, because if you continue to stay as that resident within our community that wants to drive your single occupant vehicle, if we don't make this shift for the others that are moving into the community, then the congestion will get so bad that we'll end up having gridlock. And so it's really about creating that right balance so that we can create a city that has choices for all and how we travel throughout the city. And so as Ed mentioned, and I think even Ty alluded to, and John did as well, we're all kind of in a really pivotal time for each of our respective areas, and we're working very closely with one another to try to bring all of our planning work together. And so John is doing, you know, work on rail and bus service and improvements there. Ty is working on a comprehensive plan for the city to really start to lay out how we want to develop in the future, that will then translate into a unified development ordinance. And then we on the transportation side, on the street side, are really looking at a strategic mobility plan, and how do we take the investment that we have available to us today and strategically make investments so that we create those connections in a manner that's safe, that gives people choices in how they travel, and really starts to move us into the future so that people are making choices in how they travel differently.
Maybe I can jump into that. Thank you, Liz. So I take you back again to those 10 goals that I showed at the beginning. Well, the first one was just 10-minute neighborhoods. I explained to people, we are not trying to create 10-minute cities. We are trying to create a city with 10-minute neighborhoods, so that every neighborhood, everyone who lives in any one of these neighborhoods can either walk, use the sidewalks, ride a bicycle, or use a scooter, or trails, or even bus transit, or maybe rail, to get to amenities within, you know, where they live, without having to drive across town to get to a CVS or a food market. And I believe that East Charlotte needs a lot of that. Frankly speaking, in my mind, when we think about 10-minute neighborhoods, it's not the automobile that matters. It should not anchor a 10-minute neighborhood. It should really be, do we have investment that complete sidewalks for kids or for seniors to be able to safely drive and walk on those sidewalks? Do we have areas where safe routes for kids and for adults as well in these communities where they can go to the shop to pick up a gallon of milk and walk back home? And people can choose, but not necessarily have to rely on the automobile. Because again, we can never build our way out of congestion. Liz is going to tell you that even if we were to get billions of dollars right now, it can only meet the needs and the gaps that we have without an investment in other means of mobility like transit and like, sidewalks and bicycle infrastructure. It's going to be very hard to accommodate an additional 400,000 people or so that our population will increase by in another 20 years. So it's really so important that equity drives our transportation investment, not just about how we build more lanes of roads, but how we can actually build more infrastructure that can bring people, to actually interact with amenities around them without having to drive. So they have a choice that's safe, but still gets them to where they need to get to.
So we've talked a lot about plans and big ideas. I think the message we were hearing, or I was certainly hearing from the notes and the comments from our transportation committee, is about what are we going to do now? Sort of a sense of urgency. So maybe to kind of bring some of this home, let's talk a little bit about what we're doing next. A couple of the key questions there are around, I'll let Ty talk a little about this in a moment, about some of the big ideas that have been out there around transportation funding and the referendum. But really the question is, what do we do if we don't get that, or what are we doing now? And what can we do now to help meet the needs that we have? So maybe I'll start with Ty to give us a little bit of the current context of where you think we are in that bigger conversation. And then I think Liz and John might have some good examples to share of some things that we're doing immediately, regardless of those bigger funding strategies.
Thanks, Ed. Appreciate that. I think John set us up earlier on with talking about investment in transit, but let me say that this is really, in my mind, a choice between whether we want to continue to build incrementally or we want to build transformationally. And incremental, and Liz will talk to you about that, and John will talk to you about that again, but incremental means, okay, we are going to continue to have these transportation bonds every 2 years. The fact is that growth doesn't happen every 2 years. Growth is happening every day, all the time. And if we're going to do something transformational, we're going to need a new source of funding. If we're going to be able to do some of the things that we said in the previous slide, we need a new source of funding, not just a new source of funding, a lot of money to be able to get it done. And we need a lot of good relationships at the federal level, at the state level, and partnership with our community members to really help us push this through. Now, it is possible that we may never get that. If we don't, then we're still doing a lot of things, and we just have to make sure that we are prioritizing our investment. And Liz is going to talk to me about that. But on that transformation and mobility network, the idea behind it is, if we were to get a legislative approval to go to the ballot and win a referendum to increase our sales tax, it definitely means that we'll be able to accelerate the projects that we have today, transportation projects, but not only accelerate that, increase the number of those projects as well, especially on Charlotte East side of town, where there's a lot of growth happening. And we know that jobs eventually will also be coming to East Charlotte. And in order for you to be able to put these things together, you need that transformation and mobility network so that people can connect home to work and walk to other places in their community. But even in the absence of something transformational, we still have an incremental plan that can continue to get us, to move forward. It just will not get us there on time and in a manner that we want. But Liz can talk more about how we will have to prioritize that if that's really where we end up.
Yeah, thank you. So I'll talk a little bit about what you see on the slide here, just to give you some idea of what we do today, given our current level of funding. And so I know this is hard to read. I won't go into any detail, but the idea behind this is just to real quickly share with you. This shows you active transportation projects that are in both districts 1 and 5. And it shows you all of the projects that are going through planning, design, and or wrapping up in construction. And the interesting thing about this map is it shows you there's a lot of activity. We've used the word incremental several times with you tonight already. And it's really about how do we go about prioritizing in an appropriate way that incremental investment from the public side, aligning that and leveraging that the best way we can with the private development infrastructure investment as well, so that we come up with these sort of comprehensive improvements across our system. So you see on this slide, for example, it's not just about road projects. We're making investments for bicyclists and pedestrians. Oftentimes those projects support transit, where we have some of our highest transit ridership corridors. And so again, it's all of these projects coming together, and I would be remiss if I didn't point out the fact that NCDOT is another important partner in making public investment in our street system. While their focus is a little bit different, they're a little more focused on those higher volume, high speed facilities. They do own a lot of the thoroughfare streets, surface streets within the city. We work very closely with them on projects. Sometimes the city will make investments on state maintained streets to make improvements for cyclists and pedestrians that the state wouldn't otherwise get to for decades. And so it's all of these projects really coming together. And as Ty mentioned, as we talk about a transformational mobility network, that's really about taking some of this same thinking and how we prioritize the work that we do and the investment that we have available. And it's really accelerating that at a much faster pace, because the incremental way in which we are making improvements we've seen over the last several decades is just not quite keeping up with the growth that we're seeing coming to the city. And with that, I will turn it over and see if John might have anything he wants to add, or Ed will send it back.
I was just going to maybe pose it back to John. You alluded to it earlier, John, the work around the bus priority corridor study. And to me, it's a good example in this case of more short-term things that CATS is thinking about in terms of investing in the bus system, making it more efficient, and enhancing amenities. And those are things, again, that don't require necessarily the big dollars. Those are things that we can implement in the mid to short term. So it'd be useful to maybe go back to that, talk a little bit about what that might mean in a place like East Charlotte.
Sure. Thank you, Ed. And I think, while we are working diligently to move forward with the transformational mobility network and building out the Silver Line and finishing the Gold Line and extending the Blue Line to Pineville, and then the Red Line into North Mecklenburg, there are things that we can and should be doing immediately. And we talked about Envision My Ride and the investments that we're making to lower the frequency, to make our bus routes more frequent. But even if we reach that point, if every one of our bus routes have 15-minute intervals between buses, if those bus routes are still sitting in the same congested corridors, then trip lengths are going to get longer. And we're going to lose the effectiveness and reliability of that investment. And so we're looking at ways that we can move people. And I think at the end of the day, this is about how we prioritize moving people rather than moving vehicles, rather than moving cars. And we banter around terms like single occupant vehicle. At the end of the day, this is a geometric challenge that we have. In our communities, our communities are already built out. You can't necessarily widen roadways like we can do in the suburbs and for highways. And so we have to find ways of making that corridor more efficient and more effective. And you do that by prioritizing moving people over moving cars. And from a transit standpoint, there's certain ways that we can do, there's certain tools that are available to us. I mentioned the signal priority, where a bus comes to an intersection, the intersection light recognizes the vehicle is close and will hold that green a little longer so the vehicle can get through. Again, moving people, prioritizing people over vehicles. Second is queue jumpers, where if we are at a intersection and the light has turned red, there is a pullover lane for buses to get out of the queue of vehicles waiting and then move ahead with the signal priority. That bus would get through the intersection before the other cars do. Again, once again, maximizing the movement of people over cars. And then lastly is the transit only lanes. What, and alluding to making that analogy back to our rail, why rail is so popular and also why it's so expensive is that it operates in its own right of way. It doesn't matter whether it's rain, snow, sleet, or whatever the weather. That train is going to, taking a train today is going to take you the same amount of time today as it did 6 months ago, and as it will 6 years from now. And so you're investing in the reliability of that service. And as our corridors continue to get more congested, as people continue to move through, we have the option of either widening those corridors or finding ways to move people more effectively through that. And transit-only lanes is one of the tools. It's not the perfect tool in every situation, but it's one of the tools that we're looking at. And I'll take the opportunity to mention that I know there has been a lot of discussion about the Central Avenue transit-only lane, but that pilot is ending. It will end at the end of the month, and it is a pilot. We have received the information that we need from that, and there will be a hard stop to that. Now, we will be looking at other corridors throughout the region to see if there are other opportunities for us to, again, highlight and utilize that technology to, again, reach our goal of moving people more effectively and more efficiently than vehicles. Thank you.
So I haven't been following the chat, but I suspect there might be a question in the chat about the Central Avenue pilot projects, and maybe we'll get to that in a moment. So let's with that, let me try to wrap up. The last theme was really around engagement. So obviously the obvious questions, it was a great segue for us from the committee to just talk about being clear about how to continue to engage in the process, what's coming up, and who to stay in contact. So I just put back on this slide the three big plans that Ty referenced before. At the top is a comprehensive plan. And again, we think of that as the kind of guiding light of everything we're doing. That's the farthest one along. If you don't know already, there's a full draft of that plan available on the website, and we certainly want comment and review of that. We're moving towards council review and adoption here in the next few months. And a couple of things I think Ty wanted to mention. There's a couple of very immediate town halls coming up on the 9th and the 16th. You can get more information about how to connect to those on the website. You see the website information there, and Alicia Osborne is the planning department's project manager for that project. The other one is the Unified Development Ordinance we talked about. Again, completely separate website, CharlotteEDO.org, which will have all sorts of detailed information. A public draft of that ordinance, as Ty mentioned, will be coming out here shortly, again, with the notion of moving towards council adoption soon. And then the last one, put the plug in from the transportation side, our strategic mobility plan. That's the one that's sort of now just kicking off and following and supporting these other plans. So we'll be kicking that off more formally here shortly with some initial community-wide and specific town halls here in the spring. So we'll be scheduling those soon, and we'll be reaching back out to Charlotte East to bring you all back as we talk more deeply about that plan, that project. And Scott Curry, who's on the call or on the session here tonight, is our CDOT project manager for that project. So we'll share this information. We can certainly give Charlotte East this presentation so you can make sure all this contact information is is shared for the group. I don't know, Ty, if you want anything else you want to say about the next steps or keeping
No, I
everyone engaged?
I think you covered it very well. I mean, there's, as well that we presented a comprehensive plan on Monday, and as expected, obviously we cannot all agree on everything in the plan. But again, that's why it's the North Star. It's supposed to really guide us towards the end goal, and it's really the mechanics of how we get there. And so, if there's something you like in the plan, please speak up for it. If you feel that there are certain things that you had expected but you did not see, please, by all means, express your comments and send them to us. It's not over. It's a draft plan. And so we definitely will be releasing an interim plan at some point that way you will be able to see comments. And if there's some ideas that you felt that we left out that are really great or they're wonderful, or maybe we're not strong enough about them, please feel free to share them with us. For the March 9 meeting, we already have over 350 registered, and we're looking forward to the March 16 town hall as well. So we just want to be able to address a lot of concerns that people may have. So thank you very much. As always, when you reach out to us, we'll be available to come chat with you. Thank you.
So hopefully we haven't taken too much time and leave enough time for the Q&A. I know we touched on a lot of topics at a kind of a high level, and I suspect, because I haven't been following the chat, but I'm sure there's lots of good questions. So I'll turn it back over to the committee members, and I think you're just going to facilitate some questions for our panel from the chat box.
Yep, thanks, Ed. Thanks, everybody. And as Taiwo, I've heard you say, Charlotte is a city of neighborhoods, and the East Side neighborhoods reflect 160,000 residents. They reflect the near, mid, and far East, as we like to call it. And that's more residents that are in Wilmington, Asheville, and Gastonia, right here on our East Side. So thank you. And thanks to all those residents that have hung in there. So we're going to get to the Q&A, and I'd like to just lift up the names of the Transportation Committee members from Charlotte East. We have Maureen Galuski, Danny Kearns, Alan Nelson, Aurelie Guevara, Patsy Kinsey, Louise Woods, and Emily Dallmeyer. And tonight, Danny Kearns and Aurelie Guevara are actually going to be our host for the Q&A. So Aurelie, you are up to answer the question from the chat of the panel.
Yeah, so the first question from James Lee: how do we assure that we have real affordable housing along the Silver Line?
So John,
I'll take, well,
okay, go
Ty,
on.
do you want to start or do you want me to?
No, go on, and then I can piggyback.
Okay. One of the things that we've done, and we've been intentional about the planning for the Silver Line, and we've heard a lot of, and our team has been out in the community a lot over the last 6 months, talking about the design phase of where the alignment will be, where stations particularly were. But at the same time, we have just kicked off our transit-oriented design study. One of the biggest lessons that we learned from the Blue Line and the Blue Line extension is that you can't just let the market determine how the corridors will develop. There have been a great deal of development along the Blue Line, some very positive and probably some that people will think have not been so positive. And so we wanted to start and be intentional from the beginning that we bring together the right people with the right expertise to help us develop strategies to ensure that we get the best type of growth that supports not only economic development, but also affordable housing and other of the larger city goals. That study has begun, and there are conversations going on, but really until we finalize the alignment and know exactly where the stations are at the end of this phase of the Silver Line design, then we will dive headfirst into how do we maximize that corridor investment to ensure that we meet all the goals that I just mentioned.
Okay, so John, you took that one. Danny, do you have the next question?
Sure. Vanetta Mitchell, why does the Robinson Church Road complete street stop at Hood Road and not continue on to Harrisburg Road?
Sure, I'll take that one. So if you follow our current transportation bond capacity. We have about 198, 200, we have about $200 million every 2 years to provide for capital infrastructure across the city. And that is currently estimated at a $70 million project. And so quite honestly, I don't believe we could fund the entire length of that project. And as we look across the city at the needs that we have when we consider congestion and safety throughout the entire city, we're looking to really target that investment and do as much as we can across the entire city. And so in this instance, we stopped that project at a point where, quite honestly, we could fund it given our current capacity.
Thank you.
Thanks, Liz. Aurelie?
From Vivian Lord, shouldn't rezoning to increase density be blocked until infrastructure is available? For example, no buses in Far East?
Very good question. We hear that a lot, and what you're saying is to have moratorium on development until we are able to have infrastructure. While that is something that people do consider, it's not often a very sustainable thing to do, because what happens is that people will still pass through, drive through your neighborhood, even if development stops or rezoning stops. People are still gonna drive through your neighborhood. So what ends up happening is you don't get the benefit of development, but you get the burden of it because traffic will not stop passing through. So it's really how we can maximize and manage it well. For example, I had a conversation today with somebody who was opposed to affordable housing units because there was no funding to extend the roadway. And we said, well, how about transit availability? And so there's a lot of things that this Envision My Ride could actually do for us if we were able to implement it over time. And so I would suggest that putting a pause on rezoning is not often a sustainable thing to do, because then you still have the burden of traffic, but you just don't get the benefits of it while that's going on. However, we can manage it well, with time, especially if we accelerate some funding that may not be available right now. Again, it brings forward the old notion of urgency to how we need to really fund that transportation infrastructure. And I really hope that we get to that point.
Thank you. Danny?
Okay, again, this is from Renetta Mitchell. How is transportation and mobility budgets taken into account when land use plans are approved and prior to approving development permits? And the question goes on, these plans the current plans seem targeted to inner city Eastside. How can we add Far East Harrisburg Road to these plans?
I can start with that, and I think maybe Liz, you cover me if I'm not doing a good job there. But so we do have a lot of area plans right now in our city. Now, I cannot tell you exactly which area plan covers the Fenco area, but I believe that the area plan is also outdated. So most of our area plans, with the exception of 2 or 3, were written back in 1990, some as far back as 1986. And so we're dealing with older area plans while we are working on new ideas. And yet we still have to rely on that. Hence the reason why we are having this comprehensive plan conversation, because that's our best way to update some of these older area plans and then begin to come down to a level of mapping different parts of the city. If we were to live in a situation now where we have a comprehensive plan and then we start having community area mapping, that's when we will come to Far East and work with you on mapping that area to be able to reflect your intents and your aspirations of what you want to see there. That eventually becomes what goes into a zoning district that we will have to design some regulations around. And then you begin to see some consistency. But that's not going to happen tonight, and it's not going to happen, tomorrow or even next month. So it's going to take a few months, hopefully, into 2022, 2023, where we are having this conversation. So how do we do that today? Is really going to have to be this type of dialogue When you have situations like that, we have to engage developers, but we also have to make sure that we engage you in the process.
Okay, thank you.
Aurelie?
Vernetta Mitchell asked, what financial strategies does the city have in place to build the sidewalks, expand mobility, create walkable 10-minute cities?
Sorry, okay, go on.
Yeah, we could probably piggyback on this one a little bit. So I'll talk a little bit about the tools that are available to us today. As I mentioned, that $200 million in capital investment that we have every 2 years if voters approve the bonds going forward. Within that capacity, it's not just about road projects, as you've heard me talk about. We also have program funds for bicycle improvements and sidewalk improvements. But again, we're a big city, and as we look across the city, we prioritize that funding based on the highest need that's out there. I will tell you the sidewalk program, for example, currently as we speak, has probably over 200 projects contained within that list. And we probably build about 3 or 4 of those at a time. So there's a lot of need out there and a lot of interest from residents like yourselves to continue to make more investment in that sidewalk construction.
Thank you. Anyone else? Do you want to add to that, or we're good? Good answer, Liz. All right. Danny?
Craig Cupel, will Harrisburg Road be widened to 4 lanes to include a better solution for the intersection of Albemarle Road and Harrisburg Road?
So I'll tackle that one. There are no funded plans to widen Harrisburg Road at this time, but I believe the long-term need that's been identified is to widen that facility and again, it's about bringing these two things together as public investment and private investment come together. So the hope is that as we see more development come to that area, the developers will start to build out that future cross section, and then the city can bring forward that public investment to complete that project. But again, there's no funded plans at this time.
Okay, I'll take the last one that I have. It's Craig Cupel as well. What type of economic impact does the city and potential developers, piggybacking on the prior question, what type of economic impact does the city and potential developers foresee with your transportation fully implemented on the east side?
So maybe I can start with that. One of the things that we're doing with our comprehensive plan is what we call a fiscal impact analysis. And we're also going to do that as part of our Unified Development Ordinance. It will tell us on one hand how much it will cost to build out this city over 20 years, so we're saying, but on the other hand, it will also tell us what the revenues will be like. The revenue part of it is very interesting. Right now, Eastside has the lowest number of jobs in the city, but we know that there is interest. We've talked about the MLS, having offices there on the Eastland Mall side, but we've also been hearing from some other developers who are actually interested in locating offices on the east side. All of those things will be factored into that economic analysis that we will do, that we're doing right now. So we know that a lot of people think of housing when they think of East Charlotte. But if you're going to create 10-minute neighborhoods, you've got to find a way to match housing with jobs. And so as we get a lot more interest, we're going to continue to encourage developers who are coming in to think a lot about all these types of opportunities for jobs creation, whether they be retail or they be major office development that can come there. But that is also connected to transit services being available, because if you have jobs, people need to be able to get on a bus or to get to that job, especially if they don't have vehicles. And so that conversation is going on. I will tell you that there are a number of developers who continue to approach us about locating businesses on the east side. We just have to make sure we have the right one.
So what I hear is that it's paramount to be able to we on the east side or the Finco side, we have a lot of developments that are coming up. But the thing that's holding us back is the fact that we don't have the wherewithal to we don't have the job market. So for that reason, that is why I'm hearing we're lacking on the Finco side, on the far east side. And to put that in layman's terms. That's the question, Taiwo.
Okay, yes. So yeah, that what I've heard it from day one. When we started working on the comprehensive plan, I tell you, one of the things we did was we divided the city into 5 areas: Center City, East Charlotte, West Charlotte, South Charlotte, North Charlotte. And we calculated what we have there today in terms of housing, in terms of jobs, distance to nearest transit services for each one of those areas. And we projected into 2040 as well what jobs will be like based on what we have today. And for today and for 2040, if nothing changes, the East Side still has the fewest number of jobs. And so when we started going into the games, the growth scenario, knowing that, we started having conversation around how can we create opportunities for jobs on the East Side? What types of jobs could be created on the East Side? And so if you look at the comprehensive plan where it is today and you focus on those areas with regards to fiscal responsibility and creating a resilient economy, you'll notice there was a little bit of bias towards creating opportunities for jobs on the East Side, which is why I said as we get people expressing interest, either coming from out of town or within town who are trying to do something in East Charlotte, we encourage them who are trying to do something in Charlotte, we encourage them to look to East Charlotte to create those jobs opportunities. But it's also important that as we talk to them about jobs creation, you have to also think about the average income. We don't want jobs that will just provide, the basic income of $7.50, but how we need to definitely make sure that it's income that can really lift communities up. It's not there right now, but you can be sure that that conversation is going on.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Aurelia, you have another question?
Yeah, I have a couple. One from Maureen is, where will the Gold Line run on Central?
I'm not sure. Okay.
I was just gonna say, I think John Lewis had to pull out, but I think Jason Lawrence with Katz is on the line.
I sure am, Ed. Thank you very much. Yeah, so the Gold Line along Central Avenue will run along Central Avenue from the Plaza Midwood area, from where it currently ends today at Sunnyside and Central. Sunnyside and Hawthorne. We'll continue down Hawthorne Lane around the Barnhart manufacturing facility, and then we'll tie into Central Avenue near Clement Avenue, and then go Central Avenue all the way to the Eastland Community Transit Center at Sharon Amity, near just shy of Sharon Amity and Central Avenue.
Jason, I think the question might have been, and I'm not positive, but it might have been around, it's going to be in a vehicle, in a travel lane on Central that currently exists.
Okay, I took that too literally. That's right, council member. It'll run for the most part in the curb lane, so that far lane along Central Avenue along that section in mixed traffic is currently planned.
So and that will be, you're talking Gold Line Phase 3, right?
Correct.
Okay, all right.
And then I had 2 questions about the bus lane on Central Avenue. Did the data not support the pilot? From Lisa Proud and from Philip Gussman, when could we get the bus lanes back?
We got saved all the really good questions after John left. Appreciate that. So I think, the purpose of a pilot is to understand how a project like this could work. And so we have gleaned a lot of data from this project, understanding how traffic reacted, how ridership performed, and how the bus performed in that new kind of travel setting. And so I think what we're really looking at is how that pilot reacted and how we can learn from that to help inform the bus priority study that John spoke of earlier. And as far as when bus lane and these kinds of treatments can come back, the bus priority study will help us with that, is determining where throughout our city where these kind of treatments can be implemented to improve the speed and reliability of our network.
Last question I had was from Louise Woods. What is the city's commitment to promptly work with the county and state to create equity across Charlotte Trail 2?
Sure, I'll take that one. So we're definitely aware of the Cross Charlotte Trail 2 concept. This is certainly part of our future plans. While it's not a funded project at this time, we're working closely with Park and Rec on their future Greenway Master Plan and looking for those opportunities to build that facility in the future.
Danny, do you have another question from the chat?
One just popped up from Craig. Growth in and around Harrisburg Road and I-485 is expanding tremendously. Is that income and its current growth going to be included in the new revised plan?
I'm assuming the new revised plan is talking about the comprehensive plan. I'm not sure if that's what the new revised plan means.
Yes, that's my assumption.
Okay, so the comprehensive plan is not going to go to that level of detail of explaining what road, the width of a road, or whether it's going to be expanded or not. It does set policies that will encourage investment in a robust transportation network, including some of the highest used, traffic corridors. And so, it's likely that eventually, I think where that question may actually be better answered is when we go out in the spring of this year and start talking about potential projects if we were to win a referendum. If we're to win a referendum, we obviously will be having mobility town halls where we're going to share with you what's included in our transportation action plan that was adopted by council way back, and then we will be hearing from you your thoughts about some of these projects as well. So I think that's really what is going to answer that question from Craig.
So at that point in time, we can provide input and
yes,
some of the gaps that we see that we need to close.
Yes, so we're going to come back. I'm committing Liz and Ed to that right now.
I would just quickly add, regardless of the mobility referendum, I want to just reemphasize we're embarking on a strategic mobility plan, and absolutely what we will be doing is what Ty was describing, is we want to be out and having these kinds of conversations, the specific kinds of things, like let's start really making sure that we understand the needs that you're seeing throughout East Charlotte. So yes, we'll be back out and we'll be scheduling those pretty soon.
Great, and I'm just so fortunate that we recorded this video. I really appreciate that.
Mr. Kearns, do you mind if I throw a question out to the community?
Not at all.
And maybe this is taking the pin out of a hand grenade right before we log off, but I'll take my chances. But given the questions around the bus lane and the questions around the gold line, I think the community, including all of us at the city, have really got to reckon with the concept that if and when phase 3 of the streetcar is built out, it is going to run in a travel lane of Central Avenue. And so all of the dynamics that were at play with the bus lane will be in play when the streetcar is running down that road. So we've got to decide collectively all of the benefits that would come along with the streetcar, and they are greater arguably than the benefits that would come with the bus lane, because it's permanent infrastructure. You're going to see economic development along that corridor because of the streetcar. There are undoubtedly a lot of benefits to that. But if a vast majority of the community says that impacts traffic patterns in a way that we don't think is beneficial, that's something we need to consider as we talk about the streetcar, because those two things are not entirely opposite each other. And so if you hated the bus lane, you might end up hating the streetcar, and we've got to have that conversation now, because it's going to create some of the similar situation in terms of the way that traffic will have to interact with it And I think that if we're not talking about that up front, we're doing everybody a disservice.
Mhm.
This is Maureen. Thank you, Larken, for bringing that up. I'd like to go ahead and wrap up this session now. We're just about to 7 o'clock and we've covered an awful lot of information. I appreciate all those that have hung in there. Without a doubt, the comprehensive plan is a very meaty subject, but we felt like it was important to bring about conversations for our community because mobility is such a big issue and it is part of the comprehensive plan, just one piece of it, an important piece of it. So Larken, thanks for that ending summary there about the transportation down Central Ave, but I think that's something that we'll pick up with the next session that we do that will really be on that strategic mobility plan. So thank you to everybody. Thank you, Ty. Thank you, Liz. Thank you, John. Thank you, Julie, Larken, and Matt for hanging in there, and also for all of the East Charlotte advocates here. Thank you so much for joining. I think it's been beneficial for us to get together and support our community. And
I just like to thank Maureen, who is a wonderful Transportation Committee co-chair on Charlotte East and a great advocate for putting this event together and coordinating it with the city, which the number of people who showed up tonight just shows that people want to have this type of forum and it is important to them. So kudos to you, Maureen.
thank you, Kristen. Good night, all.
Good night.